Hello and welcome to Dynamics Update. We are back with a new episode, and this time we also have a guest. But first of all, I would like to introduce my esteemed colleague, Gustav Sundblad. Hello, Gustav.
Hello, Johan. Introduce and say welcome, perhaps. Hello.
Yes, of course. and with us today, we have a guest. Hi, Patrick. How are you today?
Hi, Owen. I'm fine. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you are very welcome, and thank you for coming on. I think it's best if you introduce yourself. Tell us a bit about yourself.
I'm Patrick. I'm 45, based in the Netherlands. I started my career working for a supply chain company. And I think it was in 2008 when I made the transfer to the Dynamics community. By that time, we were in the transition from Dynamics, what was it? AX 2009. So that was the latest version when I onboarded. And soon after I actually started to gain interest into commerce and so moving away a little bit from the classical supply chain areas. And that's why I kind of developed myself into a solution architect, always marrying the functional and the technical side, with a special interest for integrating the Dynamics apps. So within the commerce community, I'm now very active integrating Dynamics with e-commerce, with point of sale solutions, etc. And that's where we kind of hit the CSU as my special area.
Very cool. You also contribute a lot with release notes. I mean, Johan and I started this podcast as a way to kind of summarize the release notes for Dynamics F&O in a digestible format. And I think what you're doing as well is because there's so much, right? So much to understand. So it's very good to have some summary of the nicest things that you publish for the CSU. And I mean, it's a very technical thing. So let's maybe start there. Like, what is the CSU? I mean, you, me, and Johan know what it is. Maybe just a quick explanation of what the CSU is and what it's coming from.
Yeah, sure. So if you look into the history, a little bit into the history of Dynamics, then the first commerce version was arrived at 2009 when the Retail Realm solution was acquired by Microsoft. That was in 2010. That was actually the birth of Dynamics Commerce. By that time, the POS of Retail Realm was connected to the ERP backend just by simple file transfer. Nowadays, what is very important when you serve sales channels like headless front ends or headless e-commerce solutions, which are based on APIs, is more direct connectivity. And in order to achieve that, Microsoft actually developed this intermediate data cache. So that original solution was two-tier. So you had like a presentation layer and data, but there was no API layer or no business rule layer. And that is what Microsoft developed throughout the years and turned that into a concept called CSU, which is basically taking your ERP data, putting it into some cacheable database, which you can deploy in any region, so close to your sales software. Mm-hmm. And then topping it off with an API layer that brings real-time query capability to your sales systems. So ERP, CRM, we may zoom into that aspect a bit later, but they are not really suitable for real-time API connectivity. The interface connectivity is simply not performant enough to bring data in real time to front ends, and that is where the CSU steps in. So, like e-commerce front ends or sales apps, they can all utilize that cache for fast data retrieval, which you often see in e-commerce stock lookups or price lookups. Yeah. So if you would make them directly to the backend, then it would not be performant enough. So you would see an endless spinner waiting for the data.
Yeah, definitely. And we see those cases as well, right? With in early versions of commerce as well, I've seen a lot of cases where you do inventory lookup with a real-time operation, right? Because then you're basically doing exactly that. So it's a performance sensitive operation, which has now been, I would say, hopefully resolved, at least with the use of inventory visibility and other means of not having to look up to the same tables as your back-end ERP. It's a very good experience.
Yeah, there are more and more services popping up now, which bring your data in real time to apps, but also with the uprise of the AI applications now.
Yeah, of course.
APIs will become more and more important. So the CSU is also a very important data cache for AI. But that's something we could also zoom into.
Yeah, of course.
In more detail. Yeah.
And I mean, looking at the history, it's been interesting to see in the later years, at least. I mean, originally when CSU, I mean, Cloud Scale Unit, it has been talking to clients. It's been like, okay, you'd use this if you have MPOS or earlier regional server, you have EPOS. It was always, I mean, I imagine you've worked a lot with integrating to other POS clients as well. And that was rarely as simple or easy as it is now. It seems to me, at least, if you agree, that later versions with headless commerce, Microsoft has really opened it up for many, many more applications. You don't necessarily have to run, even though it's much easier to implement store commerce now because it's all integrated, right? There is still the possibility to integrate other commerce applications to using the CSU, so you can leverage the same functionality.
100%. So originally the CSU was designed to just serve the Microsoft clients. So the Microsoft POS, which is now Store Commerce app, and also the Microsoft e-commerce solution, which was originally even a SharePoint solution, but now it is like a mature e-commerce platform. They both utilize that CSU cache plus API layer, so that data cache plus API layer. But now I see a real trend in the market that Microsoft are pushing this headless engine, as they call that CSU, also that headless engine also for third-party use. So third-party POS, as you rightly stipulate, and also third-party e-commerce or other apps.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I saw it pop up in some material, and it was like, I reacted because it was very uncommon, but that was like 2 years ago, so now it's very common as well.
Correct, but so most of the partners are still struggling, right? Because they come from a more classical ERP background. They're not really aware of this functionality. Functionally, the commerce module embellishes a lot of other modules in ERP. So it's not just this commerce module. And then on top of it, you have this scalable CSU, which you can deploy multiple instances for. So ERP is one instance, but with the scale, you can deploy multiple. And that makes it a bit complex for most of the partners. So they still have to grow into that market. To be fair, I personally saw that potential already in 2015. So my first client was integrated on a predecessor of the CSU, which was then called Retail Server, back in 2015. And I had conversations also throughout the years with Microsoft that they had gold in hands. But now I think, like you rightly state, 2 years ago, they started to really materialize it. Also maybe triggered by the fact that this is the ideal backbone for AI purposes, in the e-commerce domain. So maybe it comes from there.
Yeah, maybe. That's really cool. And I think, especially as you say, struggling with it. There are struggles with CSU even today, of course. There's a lot of struggles, but I think exactly as you say, because there's a certain set of skills, because it is a different application. It's a different code base. It runs on Azure SQL, sure, but it's a completely different application. And it's important to understand that when you plan for using a commerce scale unit, because it's you can't put the regular X++ Dynamics developer and just say, hey, can you build something here? Because it's just completely different. It has the similar names, of course, similar business logic, but it's just that's something we've learned over the years as well, that planning for implementations of CSU requires a specific skill set, and it's not very common. I think it's harder to get the hold of someone who understands CSU and commerce and store commerce and C# and so forth. But in essence, it's just a C# application. It's just has a lot of Dynamics-oriented logic, right?
Yeah, so I think there are three aspects which make it really difficult to embrace this domain, especially technically. Because number one is that in order to be effective in this domain, I think you really should combine functional and technical know-how. So most of the people working in our domain, they have either a functional focus or a technical focus. But in this domain, it's very important to understand when I set something up in the Dynamics backend, commerce related, how it impacts the API behavior. And especially when you develop something for a front-end e-commerce solution or front-end POS solution, then you need to understand the end-to-end flow, but also the end-to-end impact of technology changes. So that is one aspect, that the functional and technical marriage in ideally one role. Then the other one is that the community lacks documentation. So since Microsoft have always been pushing this for their own sales clients and not really for third party, there is a lack of documentation. Now they try to fill the gap, or some people like me are trying to fill the gap by publishing docs on the GitHub. There's a nice library now, but it's still only a little portion of the full stack what is required. To give you one example, if you do understand how to consume these technical APIs, and if you do understand how you need to perform setup in the backend to make them work for you, then still you will face challenges, technical challenges, when you integrate, for example, a front-end e-commerce solution. Because these solutions, they expect you to bring all the API information on a silver plate, right? So well documented, etc. And that's not what the standard offers. So you, for example, have to provide your own open API documentation, or because that's simply not available. And then the third blocker, I think, is the license structure.
Of course.
So because I have raised an idea on Ideas Portal, I think it was 1.5 years ago, to have a headless license, because the licensing basically still assumes that that you are integrating, for example, either an e-commerce solution or a POS solution completely 360, right? So using a lot of APIs, and the model is based on average order value, so they expect you to actually check out, raise an order into Dynamics. But some of the companies, they only want to use the pricing APIs, especially now with the uprise of unified pricing, or stock APIs, or only a few APIs, and then it could be an expensive solution, or you are actually not even having transactions landing. So how do you deal with that license-wise? The license guide is actually not supporting that specific use, and most of the customers are interested there. So I think there are some rumors in the community that such a license will appear, and hopefully soon, because then it will be easier to sell the solution, and also make it land with a lot more companies.
Yeah. I mean, you've installed your fair share of retail servers back in the day, right? And so I mean, you can, the complexity technically, right? And it's been easier now, correct?
Yes. I mean, when we went to F&O, and being able to have one install package and basically a next finish install, definitely beats the fact that you need to install 48 certificates that needs to be valid, and you have to have a CA and whatever. It was a bit of a hassle. It's much easier now. So that's we're making progress. That's absolutely correct.
I would say both. Some of these things are still complicated. It's again back to the story where you come into a project as a Dynamics consultant, and everyone says Dynamics, and then you end up in, now I have to install a store commerce, a POS application. That's a whole different skill set, because you need to understand, because these things operate on-prem, right? I mean, at least if you're not running Cloud POS, you're installing components in the client's infrastructure, which requires you to understand TLS. You need to know certificate. It's a whole different skill set which you need to know. So I mean, rarely someone knows all of these things, but it's really The next finished part is when you do full cloud. Then you can do the other part when you need to do actual physical footprint. Then you need to know how this works. Opus drivers, Johan. That's also another favorite subject, right?
Printers, I love them.
Printers, exactly. But in all essence, I mean, it is a complete package. It's just, as you say, Patrick, it's not a clear 20-page manual. Do this and then you do that. Especially when it comes to APIs. A question I had there, Patrick, a pain point. If we can swing back to the license pain point later on, perhaps, because that's really a pain point, I think, for implementing what I believe is a very, very good technical solution. But when it comes to headless commerce and sales channels, the idea here is, of course, for the sales channel to embrace Microsoft's way of working, where you use online stores, you have assortments, and you connect to your CSU and you download your assortment, thereby getting all the necessities for implementing. But some want to kind of bypass that because you just want to do, as you say, just price request, maybe perhaps, or inventory lookup, or a sales order. And then you struggle not only with documenting APIs, but you need to pass a product rec ID in some of these APIs. And then you need to ensure that the sending system has that rec ID. And if they don't download the assortment, they might have a PIM solution or something. There's a lot of technical hurdles to overcome. Is that also, I mean, is that something you share, or is it just that I haven't understood how it works?
Yeah, so I of course I should we should try not to exaggerate the negative aspects, because I think people listening will think that it's a very cumbersome solution that is hard to handle. And I think coming back to your question, if you're really deep into the setup and you understand the implications, then you can actually, with some creativity, keep it really simple.
Yeah.
So, for example, I have a B2B customer. They have a full-blown product hierarchy set up. You can reuse that as well as a channel navigation hierarchy, for example. So you don't necessarily have to set things up twice. I made it very simple for them to kind of release their products through the assortment funnel into their CSU database, just by setting up a commerce product hierarchy with only one node, and that node is called online sellable. So whenever you assign a product from that main hierarchy, if you assign it just to that single node, then behind the scenes it will publish everything. Like the assortment is linked to the channels, that there are batches running, doing all the heavy lifting for you, to pre-process the assortment and then sync it. So if you use the tooling, with enough know-how, that then you can keep things really simple on the setup side. And that is also, I think, your job as a consultant.
Of course.
And then ideally, you also know the impact on the technical side. So you mentioned rec IDs.
Yeah.
But for example, the product search API also supports search by item ID. Mm-hmm. So people may not know it, but that is actually supported. So you can search by product ID, by item ID, or by search condition. And the search condition is Azure AI search driven behind the scenes. So in the Microsoft tenant, you can actually enable through setup in the backend, you can enable AI search, and then attributes, product names, product descriptions, etc. are automatically indexed. And then it's very easy by the search condition to also search, for example, for a product number or an item ID or a substring of the product name. So you need to have that know-how to understand that you can actually keep it simple.
Yeah,
so
makes sense.
Yeah.
No, I think that's where we struggle a lot with having to explain how it works, and then going to those, as you say, they expect APIs to be served on a silver platter. So I think sometimes the pain point is not that it doesn't work. The pain point is explaining how it works and why it works that way. Because even though it might be simple, the other systems are not dynamics, right? So they might work in different ways or have different data models. So I think that's where the kind of struggle, as opposed to installing, as you say, a very simple store commerce setup. You can do that in a few hours, right? Because it's so interconnected. As soon as you bring in something external, then it takes a little while to connect to those.
So to give you an idea, if somebody comes with let's say a headless e-commerce solution, so a solution where no data is in the e-commerce front end, where there's no business rules in the front end, it's just a UX layer, then I can publish the most relevant APIs. That's about 20-25 APIs with backing setup. I can do that in maximum 5 days. So it's absolutely possible. Of course, it depends on customer requirements. So often where most of the work sits is that you have to talk to the, with all due respect, classical ERP team, and you need to explain them how you can best marry up their setup with the commerce setup, because that sometimes leads to conflicts.
Yeah.
I'm personally coming from that more classical area, so I understand the purchasing, accounts payable, accounts receivable processes, finance, warehouse management, etc. But letting them understand the commerce side of things, that is a bit challenging. So, for example, a simple concept like a channel and the financial dimensions which are inherited from the channel to orders and then stamped on GL transactions, that is already something you could easily, consume 30 minutes for to have it understood, right? So it's, yeah.
It makes a lot of sense when you explain it that way, and it's very rare that you have the same resource going into commerce as well as you always have some backend. But explaining how it works, one other example would be the inventory handling in commerce, which is very, very different from the advanced capabilities within supply chain management, of course. So you have to take those into account as well. Is that something you see coming as well? With I know there are location questions in many cases if you have a lot of complex locations in your backend, perhaps, but store commerce doesn't really support advanced warehousing in the same way as you might in supply chain management. Is that also a common struggle, or do you think is there a best way of setting up those things?
So if you really look in the store dimension, right, and then that is an often heard blocker. But on the other hand, you can really keep it simple on the store side, and often in store you have a few locations like the stock room and the actual sales space, or even a virtual return location. So there are a few locations which you can leverage. So it's not really like a big deal anymore. That's what I've seen. Yes, maybe 5 or 7 years ago, yes. Now people have found creative ways, to go around this setup. For example, most of the customers are no longer using the store commerce app for actually receiving the goods. They're more interested in React apps or Power apps to do that. And they kind of go around those issues, right? So it's the world has changed in that sense, and stock wise, there are a couple of ways to kind of publish your stock. You already mentioned inventory visibility,
yeah.
But what some people don't know is that you could seamlessly transition actually from the more classical stock lookup. Which is called channel side inventory. So then you sync the stock to your channel database and have this API returning it to the inventory visibility, because there is a parameter which literally flips behind that API on the CSU to not look at the local channel database, but to look at the inventory visibility API. So they're kind of abstracting inventory visibility behind that CSU API.
Yeah.
So when you would transition from old to new, it could be seamless behind that API.
I know. I saw that feature as well. And the only thing missing is the availability to do cross-legal entity lookups, I think, in many cases. With that would be perfect, using fulfillment groups.
You can do that. So yes, there is an estimated availability API, but there's also an estimated warehouse availability API. The only downside is that you have to instruct that API to look for a warehouse plus the product combination. But then you can actually request availability for a warehouse in another legal entity.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So that's the trick.
Yeah, very nice. I need to look that up. So where do you see commerce going from here then? I mean, the license question is going to be a deal breaker in some cases, but in some cases it's worth. What do you see there? The biggest problem right now is the cost of the CSU, right?
Yeah, so in one of my latest blog posts, you can find it on LinkedIn, I actually made a calculation aided by AI tools. So I let AI calculate for various order volumes or average order values and those combinations. I let AI calculate different price points, and then I took the cost of the CSU license as a portion, or divided actually by the average order value. So, and then I saw that the percentage of margin that is actually lost when using the CSU is rather low. So with color coding, I indicated that for most common volumes and also average order values, especially in B2B, but also in B2C, the margin was completely acceptable. So if you look at from a per order point of view, the cost is not too high, right? But I mentioned earlier that if you're not using the APIs full blown, so only individual APIs, then there's actually no license available.
No, exactly. And maybe that's just a good way to do it, because then you could possibly do order capture some other way if you don't have that intensity. It opens up more possibilities, right? Because I do agree. I think the CSU is a very, very, very cool component, and it opens up a lot of scenarios. And not the least, it takes, so anything that offsets performance of the Dynamics backend, such as inventory visibility and other tools that are there, is very good. And it helps out. It makes total sense, because it should be close to your business. And if you can deploy a scale unit globally or just by off-putting it, it makes total sense. It's sad that I see a lot of pushback of the cost, because it should be clear.
Yeah, because the application, so the domain where you can use the CSU is much broader than people think. Exactly. I think the most underestimated area is using commerce APIs in CE, so in Dynamics Dataverse. I was actually attending a workshop last Monday where a partner was presenting a CE quote to order process. And they were still relying on dual write, trade agreement sync to Dataverse. And then they had built their own custom service on top to actually reflect the correct pricing, which was then in line with the ERP pricing. And I told them, you can use the Get Active Prices API, because that supports, let's say, 98% of all pricing scenarios, including even the new unified pricing scenarios. So if you consume that as opposed to your custom service directly from CE, which is very well possible, you can even use a flow to do it, then you can, link up a rich API fully backed by Dynamics pricing and bring it into Dataverse.
That's very cool.
So a little bit of creativity, and you can do the same for stock lookups, right? Maybe even for looking up loyalty or other information from ERP, because actually, like I said before, the CSU is just a data cache of ERP. Most of the entities, most of the tables are supported, or you can easily add them. And for most of the tables and data entities, there is an API available with a lot of business logic built in. And I see a lot of partners rebuilding that, for example, on the Dataverse side. And because dual write only gives you data, it doesn't give you business rules. So highly underestimated area.
Very cool. Johan, what's your thoughts on that? Doing pricing via CSU into CE?
So there are absolutely benefits to it, because I mean I would say that having worked with the pricing engine through dual write, I think it works okay, but there are absolutely issues with it. The main issue being that it's very, very non-transparent. You can't really troubleshoot it. You can't really understand exactly how it works, because it's sort of a black box where you get it. I mean, how the price is delivered back to CE is pretty obvious, because it's put in the dual write and the sync is forced. But understanding exactly how the implementation on the CE side works isn't that obvious. So that's why I think it might be a good idea as well.
Yeah, and also more advanced pricing scenarios like deal pricing or mix and match or quantity discounts or a combination. That is where you actually do not want to rely just on data sync and then a custom service interpreting that. You really want to have it like a unified price point for your whole ecosystem, and that is what this API brings to the table.
And with pricing management and unified pricing, as you say, we had Sherry on the show earlier as well. Yeah. It's a whole new set of complexity, right? You can build very complicated pricing scenarios using pricing management, and if you want to do those lookups directly to backend ERP, you might be in trouble, right? So that's another very good use case for the CSU, because it does, as you say, support pricing management rules as well, so that you get offset of doing all those price lookups by using the CSU, but you can still leverage all the attribute-based pricing and so forth, all the cool new stuff that's coming.
Yeah, 100%. You set it up in one place and then you reuse it across the whole ecosystem. That's really powerful.
That's very cool. So, we need to round up. I think, Johan, we tried to stick around 30 minutes. So, with some finishing words then, Patrick, where do you see what's coming next in the CSU or commerce side that you think we should really look out for?
Yeah, it's always a wild guess, but what I think is that the whole community, including Microsoft, they're now actually realizing how powerful the CSU concept is. So the data cache and all these APIs packed with business logic. I think the next step will be that they will probably kind of detach it from solely being a data cache on top of ERP. I think what they will do is that they will make sure that it will at least be a cache on top of ERP and Dataverse, so that all the data from there can go into that CSU database. And then you can also build APIs actually on top of your Dataverse data. And maybe even third-party data, which is then loaded into Dataverse, right? And then can also be exposed. So it could be or grow into a more generic performant API layer, similar to inventory visibility in terms of cache structure and performance, and then serve more domains than only commerce.
Mm.
Yeah. But it's a wild guess, so maybe it's not going to turn out like that, but that's my gut feeling.
Let's hope for very cool new features as well coming. And thank you so much for joining us, Patrick. It's a great conversation, and I at least look forward to deploying new versions of the CSU and having fun with it.
My pleasure, guys. Thanks.
Thanks a lot,
so
Patrick.
Much.